Her lips were cracked. Her hands trembled on the edge of the broken well. Her eyes, half open, half gone, stared into nothing. The dry wind burned her skin, and the sun felt like punishment. "You've paid for me. Just do it." Her voice cracked like old wood, dry and full of dust. Tears mixed with sweat on her cheeks, and her whole body shook. She was not begging for life anymore. She was begging for it to end. Jack McRae froze. The sound of her words hit him harder than any gunshot. He'd seen cattle die in the desert, horses break their legs, men turn cold in the snow. But nothing had ever broken him like the sight of that girl. It was the summer of 1885 in Dodge City, Kansas. A place that smelled of sweat, whiskey, and blood, the last stop for lost souls. Jack had come to buy 10 horses. He left with one human being instead. They said her name was Nora. No one knew if that was real or just something the auctioneer made up to make her sound worth more. She was 22, too young to look that tired, too broken to fight back. Jack had watched her standing on that small wooden stage, wrists tied, hair tangled like dry hay. Men shouted numbers. Each shout felt like a bullet. When the price hit $40, Jack raised his hand. Silence fell. No one dared to bid higher against a man like him. He had the quiet eyes of a man who had buried too many friends. Now, miles away from Dodge, his wagon rattled down the dirt trail toward his ranch in Palo Duro Canyon. Nora sat in the back, silent, hands tied, eyes closed. She hadn't eaten since sunrise, when they finally stopped by the old well on the edge of his land. She could no longer stand. She tried to hold on to the rim, but her knees gave out. That was when she said it again. Softer this time. "You've paid for me. Just do it." Jack stood behind her, fists clenched. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. The girl's back was covered with bruises. Her breathing came in small, painful gasps. He realized what she thought he had bought her for. And for a moment, he hated himself for letting her think that. He took a step forward, grabbed her by the arms to keep her from falling, and whispered, "No one's going to hurt you here." She didn't believe him. Her body stayed tense, ready for the worst. Jack looked toward the ranch house in the distance, the fences, the yellow grass swaying in the hot wind. He had built this land with his hands, brick by brick, year after year. But right now, it felt like a prison. He untied her wrists, poured water into her hands, and said quietly, "Drink. You're safe now." For a long second, she just stared at him, unsure whether to trust him or spit in his face. Then she drank, slowly, carefully, as if she didn't believe the water was real. Jack turned away, pretending to check the horse's saddle, but his chest felt heavy, like someone had tied a rope around his ribs. What kind of man buys a girl to save her, and what kind of life waits for her now, on a ranch so far from the world she once knew? The next morning, the ranch smelled of dust and coffee. Nora woke up inside the small wooden cabin, the same one Jack had built when he first came to this land. The wind came through the broken window, carrying the sound of horses. She tried to sit up, but her body hurt. Her wrists were raw, her arms bruised. For a second, she thought she was still trapped somewhere in Dodge City. But then she saw a cup of water, a piece of bread, and a folded blanket beside her. Jack was outside, feeding the horses, talking low to them like they were people. She watched him through the half-open door. He moved slow, steady, like someone who had nothing left to prove. When he noticed her, he didn't walk over right away. He just said, loud enough for her to hear, "There's coffee if you want some." No questions, no orders, just that one sentence. Nora didn't answer, but she stepped out a few minutes later, barefoot in the dirt. The sun was soft, not cruel like yesterday. She smelled the coffee, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something that almost felt like peace. Jack poured her a cup, handed it over without looking straight at her. He spoke quiet. "You can stay here till you figure out what comes next." She frowned, not sure if she heard him right. He kept talking. "You don't owe me anything, not a thing." The words hung in the air like smoke. Nora didn't know what to say. She stared at the cup, then at him, trying to read the truth in his face. Men didn't talk like that. Not here, not in this world. They spent the rest of the morning fixing the old fence near the barn. She worked slow, clumsy at first, but he never raised his voice. He showed her how to tie a proper knot, how to hold the rope, how to calm a nervous horse. And when she laughed by accident at his old jokes about stubborn mules, he didn't smile, but his eyes did. Over the next 2 weeks, Nora's days blurred into a rhythm of small tasks, mending fences, tending the garden, and learning to saddle a horse on her own. Her hands grew steadier, her gaze less haunted, as if the wide sky was slowly mending the cracks in her soul. By sunset, Nora's hands were covered in dirt, but her shoulders felt lighter. Jack lit the lantern and said quietly, "You did good today." She didn't believe him, not yet, but when she looked at the fading sky, she thought maybe this place wasn't hell after all. Maybe it was something else. That night, the sound of coyotes echoed from the canyon. Jack sat on the porch, cleaning his rifle, watching the stars. Inside the cabin, Nora couldn't sleep. Her mind was full of questions she wasn't ready to ask. What kind of man saves a stranger like that? And what is he really hiding out here at the edge of nowhere, in the corner of the cabin? An old locked chest gathered dust, its key hidden somewhere only Jack knew. Perhaps holding letters from a past he never spoke of, a family lost to the frontier's cruelty. The sound came first, hooves in the distance, rolling through the heat like thunder. Nora looked up from the fence she was mending and saw the dust rise over the far ridge. Jack stepped out from the barn, his hand already resting on the old rifle by the door. He didn't say a word, he just watched the horizon, quiet and sharp. Within minutes, 3 riders came into view. Their coats were dark, their faces half covered with scarves. Nora froze. She knew those men. They were the same ones who had dragged her to the auction weeks ago. One of them called out, "Morning, McRae. We've come for what's ours." Jack didn't move. He just spat into the dust and said, calm as ever, "Nothing here belongs to you." The leader grinned. "Come on now, old man. You paid for her." She's still marked. "You think paper changes?" That Jack's jaw tightened. He cocked the rifle, the sound crisp in the dry air. "Turn around and ride home while you still got daylight." For a long second, no one spoke. Only the wind moved through the yellow grass. Nora stood behind the well, her hands shaking. She could feel her heart pounding in her throat. Then the men laughed, low and cruel. "You don't scare us, rancher. You never did." The moment stretched thin. A hawk cried overhead. Jack took one step forward. "You touch one foot on my land, you'll see how scared you can get." Something in his eyes made them hesitate. They had heard the stories. Jack McRae, the man who single-handedly drove off a gang of cattle rustlers in Abilene 5 years back, leaving 4 men in the dust without firing a second shot. They knew his kind. He was not bluffing. He had nothing to lose. Finally, the leader spat into the dirt and turned his horse. This ain't over. They rode off toward the ridge, their laughter fading with the dust. Nora came out from behind the well, her face pale. She whispered, "They'll come back." Jack nodded once, "Then we'll be ready." That night, the air felt heavy. The ranch was quiet except for the horses breathing in their stalls. Jack sat by the fire, loading his rifle with slow, steady hands. Nora watched him from the doorway, the light flickering across his face. He looked older than before, worn but calm, like a man waiting for a storm he already knew would come. She wanted to ask why he risked everything for her, but the words wouldn't come. Somehow, she knew he wouldn't answer anyway. Not yet. Outside. Lightning flashed over the canyon. The wind picked up, whispering through the grass. Tomorrow would bring something different. Maybe worse, maybe better. Before we find out what happens when they return, make sure you follow this channel so you don't miss the next part of the story. And while you wait, pour yourself a cup of tea, take a deep breath, and tell me, what time is it where you are, and where are you listening from? By sunrise, the storm was gone, but the ground was still wet, and the air carried that smell of fresh dirt and trouble. Jack didn't say much at breakfast. He just poured coffee, looked at Nora, and said, "They'll be back, and this time I won't just wait." He saddled the horse, checked his rifle, and told her he'd ride to Fort Griffin. That was a day's ride east, where the sheriff and the Texas Rangers kept their law. Nora wanted to go with him, but he shook his head. "This is my mess. You stay and keep the lantern lit." The road was long and hot. Jack rode past endless grass and dry creek beds, the sun high and mean. He thought about that girl sitting back at the ranch, about her eyes that still didn't know how to trust, and about the men who thought they could own anyone they wanted. By the time he reached the fort, his shirt was soaked with sweat. He tied his horse, walked straight into the sheriff's office, and dropped a small folded paper on the desk. The sheriff, an old friend, looked up slow. "Jack McRae, been a while." Jack nodded. "Need your help. Got 3 men running a trade. Took a girl, sold her in Dodge. I got proof." The sheriff unfolded the paper. It was the bill of sale Jack had signed the day he bought Nora. He turned it over, saw the mark of a known trafficker burned into the edge. "Hell, Jack, you know what this means?" Jack looked down at his boots for a long moment. The air in the room felt thick. The sheriff waited, but Jack's voice came low. "Maybe I didn't have to do this." He paused, eyes far away. "But years ago, someone needed me, and I didn't come." Jack nodded again. "Yeah. It means I've been carrying their sin in my pocket." By noon, 2 rangers rode out with him. They followed the tracks down to the canyon edge where the outlaws had camped. Jack had spotted their campfire smoke the night before, marking the spot on his map, a narrow ravine where the wind hid their tracks, but not their scent. The men didn't fight long. When the first shot cracked through the wind, the rest threw down their guns. Jack didn't say a word to them. He just watched as the rangers tied their hands and hauled them toward the fort jail. Justice in the West was simple, sometimes too simple. When Jack came home, the sky was turning gold. Nora was waiting by the fence, her hair pulled back, eyes full of worry. He handed her the folded paper and said quiet, "It's done. You're free." The sheriff had stamped it void at the fort, turning a mark of ownership into a certificate of freedom, signed under the eyes of the law. She didn't speak for a long while. Then she whispered, "I was never just a thing to you, was I?" Jack looked away. "Never was." The sun dropped behind the canyon, painting everything in orange, for the first time since Dodge. Nora smiled, not wide, but real. Yet deep inside, Jack knew something was still unfinished, because justice can clear a name, but it can't heal a soul. And that's what the next morning would test, when Nora made a choice that even Jack didn't see coming. The morning after the gunfire, the world felt new. The rain had washed the dust off the ranch, and the air smelled clean. Jack stood by the porch, watching the light crawl over the canyon walls. For the first time in months, the land looked peaceful. Nora walked out barefoot, holding 2 cups of coffee. Her hands still shook a little, but her eyes were different now. There was calm in them, maybe even courage. She handed him a cup, smiled softly, and said, "Feels quiet today." Jack nodded. Quiet can be good. They sat for a long while, saying nothing. The horses grazed, the wind moved through the grass, and somewhere far off, a hawk cried. It wasn't the kind of silence that hurt anymore, son. It was the kind that heals. Later that day, Nora packed a small bag. She told Jack she wanted to ride to the nearby town, learn to read, maybe work at the small church school. Jack looked at her, half proud, half afraid to let go. "You sure you're ready?" She smiled. "I have to be." Her voice wavered for a moment, remembering the well where despair had once gripped her, but now replaced by a quiet resolve forged in the canyon's silence. He saddled a horse for her, helped her mount, then stepped back. For a moment, they just looked at each other. No more fear, no more shame, only understanding. Before she left, Nora said quietly, "I used to think my life ended the day they sold me, but now I see it just started the day you didn't touch me." Jack didn't answer. He only nodded once, slow and heavy. Then he watched her ride off through the yellow field until she disappeared behind the ridge. That evening, the ranch felt empty but alive. Jack fixed the old well, the same one where she had once fallen. He cleaned the stones, replaced the rope, and filled a bucket with clear water. The sun sank behind the canyon, and the world turned gold again. He whispered to himself, "Maybe some things can be saved after all." And that is how healing happens out here in the West, not through big words or promises, but through small acts of kindness, quiet choices, and a bit of courage to start again. So let me ask you something. What would you have done if you were Jack? Would you have had the strength to stand against the world for someone who had nothing left? If this story touched you, take a second to like this video and make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next ride into the old Wild West. Now, take a sip of your tea, breathe slow, and tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are and where are you listening from? Your stories matter too, so share them below.